Hello and welcome to Bear Atheist. If you haven't noticed, sometimes I like to punish myself in a sense. Here we are, back at Daily Disciple, and he's gonna react to, or respond rather, to an ex-Christian TikToker. So this will be quite interesting. Let's get into the video.
God literally says, I think it's Exodus 21:20, that if you beat a slave and they recover in a couple days, it's okay because they're your property. Like, if I was the all-powerful creator of the universe, why would I choose to include that?
Does the Bible endorse slavery? What about the seemingly evil things that God did in the Old Testament? And was Jesus even a real person? In today's video, I'm going to be interacting with some objections made by
Okay, so those are not even the same thing. Is Jesus even a real person? Based on scholars and and things we find, yes, Jesus was an historical figure. There was someone actually named Jesus that exists. Is God evil in the Bible? That slavery supported through the Bible? Yes, 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 it was. I guess you're just gonna smoosh all of this together, all these questions together, to say, well, oh, we're just gonna shove it out because Jesus exists. Definitely, the Bible did not support slavery. It did, though. It did.
an ex-Christian TikToker who made a video explaining why he no longer identifies as a Christian. As always, let's dive in.
This may sound crazy, but honestly, the biggest thing that made me change was reading the Bible and studying Christianity. Because in church, you're kind of taught the same type of things. They pick and choose from certain areas of the Bible they want to focus on. And I think that can be okay, especially when it's focused on the love portions of the Bible and more like good things. But when you start actually diving into the Bible, reading it for what it is, looking at how it was created, the fact that Jesus' life wasn't even documented until 40 years after he left Earth, a lot of things just don't really add up.
I actually think this is a testimony to the
Before he comes out to say what he has to say, I agree the best way to show Christians that they're believing in something that makes no sense is to have them read the Bible through a secular lens. Don't just go with your own bias. Kick outside your own bias, and if the Bible is true, you'll come out of the other end believing still in the same God. If it's not, well, you will know you actually were seeking for the truth. Just go through it and see if the Bible actually makes sense. And then after that, go and search up and actually research what scholars, biblical scholars, Christian and other biblical scholars that are not Christian, agree that they know about the Bible. And if you still come out of that as a Christian, well, at least you did your research and you still believe. But most would never do that. Even apologetics don't do that. They go in the Bible and read it through their biased lens.
benefit of going verse by verse in church instead of focusing on purely topical messages in order to get the word across. By going verse by verse, yes, it takes longer, but it means that you can't avoid anything. The sad truth is you won't see this in a lot of modern trendy churches because they're scared of certain passages of the Bible and they don't want to scare people away. When you go verse
I may be pausing a lot in this video, but wrong actually. Every church pick verses for verses. They don't go through an entire chapter. They're trying to connect the Old Testament to the New Testament. They're trying to connect Isaiah to Jeremiah they're trying to connect the entire Bible to make it seem like it was all talking about Jesus. Like, it's all dumb, but that's exactly what these churches do. So they don't just no church just go through Genesis 1, 2, 3, read the entire chapter. Like that's not what they do. Even if they do that, like go through one chapter, they're still gonna connect to other chapters. So verses by verses. We're saying read the entire Bible, read the entire stories, and see if it make any sense.
verse by verse, you were teaching people, you're teaching your congregation that you're not scared of anything, that nothing in the Bible, you shouldn't be like, oh, we don't touch that stuff because we don't know how to answer that. No, there is an answer. There is a reason behind it. Okay, but in this next point, my boy is complaining that Jesus' life was documented 40 years after his ascension. He says, how can we believe that Jesus even existed or what he said was true, because it was documented 40 years after.
And my boy here never said anything like, how can we believe Jesus even exists? He never said that. So good job bringing up a straw man, which most scholars agree that Jesus exists. So good job bringing up a straw man to beat down
his life. But hold up, that is still within the lifespan of eyewitness accounts. So it's not even like it's a generation ahead. It's still within that same generation from a purely historical perspective.
And we are to believe that they remember something that happened 40 years ago. And also, I must mention, we have no actual eyewitness account. None of the accounts that we have were actual eyewitness. They were written down through oral traditions. Scholars agree on this. They actually study the Bible.
40 years is an extremely short amount of time. Now, I'm not exactly sure why he poses this accusation. Maybe he's trying to put into question the existence of Jesus because his life was documented 40 years after his life. But it's important to note that there are extra biblical, impartial sources that confirm Jesus' life as well. We can look to the writings of Flavius Josephus, one of the most famous Jewish historians. He affirmed that yes, Jesus did exist. He lived.
I wonder why he is famous. Maybe because Christians love this guy, because he wrote something about Christians existing. Not that Jesus was God, not that Jesus rose from the dead. He just said there were some that believe in this bullshit and they call themselves Christians. I'm not sure if I'm quoting that right. Obviously, I'm not quoting that right. I'm just paraphrasing. That's all he said. He didn't say, oh yeah, Jesus rose from the dead and now I'm a Christian. He's a Jewish man writing about people who believe in something like that. That's not evidence for your claims. That's not evidence for anything.
He was a teacher and he was crucified. Now get this, even notorious atheist biblical scholar Bart Ehrman affirms that, yeah, Jesus did exist, and he tells all the atheists out there to stop denying it because it makes them look dumb.
And then when you get into the verses that talk about slavery, God literally says, I think it's Exodus 21:20, that if you beat a slave and they recover in a couple days, it's okay because they're your property. Like, if I was the all-powerful creator of the universe, why would I choose to include that in my religious text? And the text is supposed to show my character.
Now, part of the reason I do these videos is because people that scroll on TikTok or Instagram are seeing this type of content and they're watching this stuff and they're looking at this verse and they're saying to themselves, oh man, I guess that's it. You know, God supports slavery and he wants, people to be enslaved and he doesn't value human rights and all this kind of thing. And it's like, no, bro, you're not getting the context of what the verse is actually saying. So that's what I want to do. Whenever I get a verse like this, somebody poses a verse to me, I'm like, okay, let me just take a step back here and look at the context. Okay, a couple things to keep in mind here. No, I'm no expert at this, but when we're looking at slavery in the Bible, we shouldn't be thinking of maybe slavery that we're more familiar with happened in the United States or in Great Britain or across the world, really, in terms of this kind of undignified kidnapping and slave. And it's not about that. It's about this kind of idea of indentured servitude where somebody.
Why do? Oh my God! Christians are the only one that you're gonna see sugarcoating slavery. There's no difference between the American slavery. The only difference is that it was restricted to just a specific color. If you're black, you're a slave. It was restricted to a specific ethnic group, a specific race. But there's no difference between that slavery and any other slavery throughout time. They're all slaves. It's just now it's restricted to just black people. That's the only difference. They were treated basically the same. No point in time were slaves respected. Because they were slaves, that's the point. Christians, are you gonna be the only one that you're gonna see trying to say, oh yeah, the American slavery was somehow different from the Bible? No, it's not. It's the same slavery. So you're not pointing anything out. You're just trying to cover up the fact that the Bible did support slavery. This is not indestitute. This is not servitude. This is not indentured servitude. That's not what we're talking about. It literally said slaves. Not servant, slaves.
Would be destitute, they'd be in poverty, they would sign a contract voluntarily with somebody that was more wealthy in order to do work for them for a given period of time, and they would become their slave and they would become their master. Another thing to keep in mind, especially in the Old Testament, was God was putting regulations around this idea of slavery. That doesn't mean that he gave it his full endorsement. He recognized the hardness of man's hearts and was trying to continue to conform them to his ways. Also, it's important to understand that in the Old Testament, kidnapping and rape,
like he did when he wiped out the people of Noah's time. I guess he was trying to, get together. Like he's trying to, have them understand his way by sending them all straight to fucking hell. This doesn't make sense. But when you just believe on blind faith, you're not gonna reason. The point of your belief is not to reason. Just believing on blind faith, even when the thing is not logical.
were both punishable by death. So we're continuing to see that this kind of slavery is very, very different from the slavery that we might be more familiar with. Okay, let's look at.
It's not, and that entire rant is bullshit. Yeah, the Bible did say thou shalt not kidnap and you shall be put to death for kidnapping. But he also said you can buy slaves from foreign lands. Again, what I would advise Christians to do is to actually read the Bible. If you don't, well, continue believing in whatever the fuck you're believing. Because you're just believing on blind faith. You don't even need to do any scholarly research to see that the Bible is full of itself. It is. None of it makes sense.
Look at the verse that he's referring to. It's in Exodus 20 to 21. It says here, when a man strikes his slave, male or female, with a rod, and the slave dies under his hand, he shall be avenged. But if the slave survives a day or two, he is not to be avenged, for the slave is his money. Now, if you're just reading this verse, you're glad that, okay, if the slave dies, then the master dies as well by the death penalty. Like, that's a good thing. But if
Did he said he shall die by the death penalty? I believe the verse said he shall be punished, not be put to death. You must keep that in mind, because it still said the slave is his money. So it's not that he's gonna be put to death for killing a slave. It's just going to be punished. And he can beat the slave to the brink. And I believe the only thing that he can do is knock the slave's tooth out and blind the slave. So he can do whatever the heck he wants to do, just not those two things. And also kill the slave. That is the standard that your God is setting. That's the regulation. Okay.
if the slave recovers, then the master just gets to go free. Like, this doesn't make any sense. But we need to look at the context. In a few verses down, it does address what happens in that scenario if a slave does recovers. It says here, when a man strikes the eye of his slave, male or female, and destroys it, he shall let the slave go because of his eye. If he knocks out the tooth of his slave, male or female, he shall let the slave go free because of his tooth. Okay, recap.
What the fuck are you recapping? It specifically said two things. And I just mentioned those two things. It specifically says two things. Meaning you can do whatever the heck you want with your slave, except blinding your slave, killing your slave, and knocking your slave's tooth out. Make some fucking sense. and I'm sorry for my language, but when it comes to slavery and Christians trying to defend it, I have no fucking that it just doesn't make sense to me. And I lose it when they start making the slavery dumb comment. It's stupid. And these same people are believing in objective morality. Even once upon a time, I wouldn't even say once upon a time, it's just like 200 years ago, most people would think having slave is okay. Even during the time of the Bible, and you see that influence in how the Bible was written.
If a slave master kills their slave, then they will incur the death penalty. They will be killed. Eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But if that slave recovers, what happens? Do they just kind of, business as usual? No, we learn in this next verse that if they, hurt their eye or damage their tooth, or like that's the language that's used, if they abuse their slave in any way, that the slave has the right to walk free, to be released from the contract. Your punishment as a master for abusing your slave is that they are free, that they are no longer bound to your previous agreement. Now, to be frank with you, there was evil slavery that took place in that day. Of course, it's happened all throughout human history. But what God was regulating was a very different look at what slavery looked like. It was one where people would volunteer themselves because of their destitution or their poverty in.
You do understand that only applies to Jews, right? The indenture servitude only applies to like Jews. You can actually have slaves. There's indenture servitude in America while slavery was going on, and there's actual slavery. There's a difference.
In order that they can be fed. Obviously, those weren't ideal scenarios, but even in that, we can see God's heart in wanting to provide dignity to the slave.
But the thing is, God does some really terrible things in the Old Testament. I mean, wipes out entire civilizations. And even then, he floods the whole earth. We love to think about how, oh wow, look at the giraffes going onto Noah's Ark. What we don't think about is the millions of people that were drowning just for existing. And people were like, oh, well, that's not God. That was Old Testament God. We have the New Covenant. But God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. That's in the Bible. And just, for a God that says he's not an author of confusion, he's got to be the most confusing character in history. And the Bible has to be one of the most confusing books of literature I've ever seen.
There is a lot to unpack here. First, one of his objections.
And yeah, it is right. The Bible is one of the most confusing shit of all time. One point is saying God is all loving. The second, you're having the entire planet wiped out. 1 second is saying God is all powerful. The next second, all of a sudden, God isn't able to do shit. Like save his own people. He has to wait 400 years for them to suffer. I guess that's quite loving. It doesn't make sense, people. It doesn't make sense. It's not even that. I guess I shouldn't say it's confusing. It's like it doesn't make sense.
Is that God did evil things in the Old Testament by wiping out civilizations, by raining down fire on certain nations, by flooding the world and killing all of those people with the exception of Noah and his family. Now, many people have posed the accusation before of saying that God is not just, that God is not good because he did these things. But the question that we need to be asking ourselves is, who defines what is just? If we're making these moral accusations against God, what foundation are we standing on? Without appealing to God's objective moral law, we're left on sinking sand. In a world without God, we are merely matter in motion, chemical reactions in body bags. There is no ought, there is no right or wrong. We have no right to dignity, we have no.
Okay, so it's going on a rant here, and I'm just gonna stop because I don't think there's any good time to stop when you're going on a dumb rant. I must point out that none of us, no Christian in the United States is stoning gay people. No Christian in the United States, or I believe this is guys from the US, or anywhere, is stoning women for not being virgins at their wedding night. Nobody's doing that. None of you are owning slaves, even though the Bible regulates for you to have slave or have servants, indentured servitude. However, you want to make yourself feel better, to just have your sky daddy comfort you, apparently, to feel the comforts in your bed at night. However, you want to put it to make yourself feel better. None of you are owning slaves. None of you are stoning gay people. Like, these are the things required of you by the Old Testament. None of you are doing any of this. None of you even doing what Jesus said, to sell everything that you own and follow him. So I don't get the idea of the objective morality that these people hold up to. You don't have any. And if the moral person that you're gonna follow is God, well, that says a lot about you. If God is moral in your book, then that's really, really insane. Wiping out the entire planet is immoral. According to whose standard? According to my standard and societal standard. Because we don't own slaves, and we don't do any of the bullshit that the Old Testament does, that the Old Testament God does and recommends. Genocide is not okay. Slavery is not okay. According to who? According to societal standard.
No intrinsic worth. In that world, wrong is just an opinion. But the truth is, there is a God, and he has laid out his objective moral standard. He is the judge. We're not. Take the flood, for instance. Yes, it was gruesome, and maybe it was even a perplexing response to what we would consider to be not that big of a deal. But then we look at what was going on there. The world was consumed with violence. It wasn't like everyone was just yippee skippy and all of a sudden God decided to rain down on them literally and wipe out all those people. No, it was.
I must mention that we have gone through quite a lot as human history. Let me describe some of the wars we've went through. The Roman Empire. Of course, they fought some wars. The Islamic Empire came in. The Islamic nations start rising. We got the Mongols killing people. And then we come to the Great Britain, slavery, all this bullshit, all this war, World War II. Let me not even mention the two nuclear bombs we drop on people, the amount of deaths that have happened, all the crazy shit that have been happening, and no global flood. Okay, I want to ask you Christians something. How terrible do you really think the Noah's flood was? Because all we hear is that they were sinning. And lying is a sin that deserves death. So how really terrible is it? You don't know. You genuinely don't know. Because there's nothing new under the sun. And that saying is literally true. There's nothing new under the sun. We have seen and we have studied history. We know so many crazy shit have already happened. And no global flood. And no rain down fire. No mass murder by God. So, how terrible did he really get? Or was it just lying? Because even when Hitler killed 6 million Jews, he's in the same place where someone that lied or still is going. So you don't know. You just know it's sin and it was violence. Any sin is violence according to God. Your objective moral standard. Stop bullshitting.
Was consumed with violence and evil. We need to be asking the question, what do we ultimately deserve? Because we can fight on behalf of these people that were killed by God in the Old Testament and say that was unjust, that was wrong of God to do that. But we need to look back at ourselves and say, what do I deserve because of my sin? And the truth is that the wages of sin is death. And God would have.
That is something that God designed, and that's not really my issue. I don't even believe that there's something, or the concept of sin is all just to manipulate people and make them feel bad for being humans, which the Christian church and you take advantage of. So good job being a dick. There's no other way to put it. I'm sorry, people.
Have been within his rights to make this a pattern of his judgment, to wipe out the world every once in a while because of the wickedness that we've been consumed with. But he made a covenant with Noah saying that he'll never flood the world again in judgment. Yeah, he did enact his justice in other ways by commanding the Israelites to wipe out certain nations that were committing grave atrocities. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that will he also reap. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I understand God's ways perfectly or his justice fully, but it's not God's job to justify his actions to me. Whenever I hear people accuse God of being unjust or condemn him for his works in the Old Testament, I just remember this verse. Evil men do not understand justice, but those who seek the Lord understand it completely. Now, what interests me is apparently self-proclaimed Christians in his life have said that there is a difference between the God of the New Testament and the God of the Old Testament. But this young man, kudos to him, actually decided to look in the Bible and see what it says about it. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Good on him.
Or you just didn't listen entirely, or you just didn't listen at all. I guess we're not all watching the same TikTok video, which he just said Christians would say we have a new commandment. He said Christians will say we have a new commandment. So the Old Testament laws, the God of the Old Testament is really not the same as the New Testament because we have a new commandment. And he said God is the same before as always, whatever the verse says. So no, we're just gonna keep going.
Him for picking this up because this is true. He's not just a big meanie in the Old Testament and a big squishball hippie in the New Testament. Just think of Matthew 10 where Jesus says, "Do not think that I've come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set man against his father, and daughter against her mother, and daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a person's enemies will be those of his own household." Jesus also said, "Repent, for the kingdom of God is at hand." Doesn't sound like all ponies and rainbows to me. But then you look in the
It sounds like an end-time preacher to me and a cult leader to me.
Old Testament, how gracious God was in providing to Abraham a ram so he wouldn't have to sacrifice Isaac. Or think of in Acts when Ananias and Sapphira promised to.
Or just think about Judges 11 where God did not actually provide a ram and just was okay with a human sacrifice.
Give what they got from selling their land to the church, but then they held some back. What happened when they lied and didn't follow through with what they had promised?
Well, God, in his just right and being all good and all loving, just killed them. And by the way, I think he killed the husband first and then the wife. I guess he's so loving and forgiving. And by the way, what was their sin? They basically lied. Isn't that stupid? This is the dumb idea. Didn't Abraham lied about like his wife being his sister, and that was apparently okay with God? But once someone else lie, it's a problem. Because if you're not chosen by God, you're doomed to hell. And he designed that. I think Christians forget the fact that when you say this designer designed everything, you mean everything, which includes sin and evil. You can't just say, oh yeah, he designed the good stuff, but the bad stuff was designed by nobody. Like, come on. If you designed everything, you design everything. If you want to give him all the credit, give him all the credit. Don't just cherry pick and just say shit. That doesn't make any sense. All this, talking about a fairy tale, a book that's literally have no evidence supporting it. All this backing up a Bible that supports slavery, backing up a book that thinks women are properties. All of this.
God killed them. To hold the idea that the Old Testament God is a big meanie and the New Testament God is a squishy hippie is to not actually have read the Bible. And I'm sorry. And that's what it comes down to sometimes. People pick and choose verses because they think it amplifies their point or their perspective of God or what they already believe to be true about God. and they don't want to dig into the nitty gritty of what it actually says to get a full scope of what God has been doing throughout the Old Testament and into the New Testament.
Now, maybe I need to point it out again that he just wasted his entire time pointing out something that wasn't the guy's point. I guess he wasn't listening, and while he was editing, it didn't just hear the guy said Christians would claim. I guess not.
Maybe for you watching this video, you're still questioning God's justice. But the question you really should be asking is, why is God so gracious to me? You're living, you're breathing, you have the opportunity to sit down and watch a YouTube video. Do you think you deserve that? No, we were all...
You see, I am gonna stop here. And I just got a flashback to the time where I was like, you know what, God, I don't even deserve to be alive. Strike me down. There's no point. I don't deserve to be alive. I don't deserve any of this. Well, nothing happened. As expected, nothing happened. None of the prayers were answered. Nobody was actually listening. This is what Christianity does to people. Makes them feel like shit. Like they don't deserve anything. They don't deserve love. They don't deserve to be cared for. This isn't what this entire channel stands for. It's bullshitting people. Loading them up with shit. This is not okay. This is not okay according to my standard. This is not okay because it's hurting people. And this guy's making slavery in the Bible. Oh, it's just servants. It's just... No, read the Bible. Read the entire chapter. And you will understand that it was clear to separate servants, because of course he has to be clear to separate servants that are Jewish and other servants that are just foreign. It separates slaves from servants. If you read the Bible clearly, you will see that this God is okay with just wiping out the entire planet and going on and starting with 8. Thank goodness none of these stories are even true. But it shows us how fucked up these people are. Believing this God could be good, or even close to something good, and wipe out the entire planet, letting 8 survive. Well, that's it for today. If you like the video, like this kind of content, please click that like button and subscribe. And I apologize for cussing so much. I don't usually do this to an extent. It start talking about slavery and start like acting like an idiot, and it just got to me. I apologize. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.